Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and there's been a lot of questions coming up regarding space stations since the last ATV, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what we know and what I think we know, and what some of the differences we may see between the stations are. So starting on the smaller and kind of simpler scale, we have satellites, and we know that these can have various purposes and levels of association, but they are being designed in a modular fashion. Now, satellites aren't going to be places where people are living, and they're not going to be people really stationed there either, as it's more likely people are going to show up, do some maintenance, and then leave. Now, we see a bit of this today in the Stanton system with the comm arrays that we have to go and replace and repair and turn back on. But that's a really very early system as far as we know it, and they're going to end up having different components like shields and power supplies and communication systems, and they're all going to be automated, but that doesn't mean repair is going to be automated or updates. Now, the goal of these satellites is going to be able to look at them and kind of know what their purpose is based on their design, and that can kind of help guide you in your gameplay options. For example, if it's a communications array, you may end up being able to steal data or information from that location. Now, in less creative ways, mission generation may present you with an opportunity to go repair a downed power plant on board a satellite, as opposed to you kind of creating your own type of journey. But some examples of how they're designed would be like military satellites may not end up having solar arrays because they're more likely to be damaged, so they may end up having some different type of power source. But they may also have different things on board like weapon systems that can either help to engage ships or maybe people inside. So if your goal is to interfere with the operations of that satellite, you may end up having to overcome some obstacles. Now, moving up to probes, these sort of live between the worlds of satellites and full stations, and we do see some examples in the ICC probe with Tessa. Now, the probes are going to be likely to be a source of missions in the verse, like we have today, which are going to provide you with opportunities to take on a job while you're flying around without having to look for your player beacons or land on a planet to find a guy like Miles. Now, I don't envision too many situations where you end up boarding a probe, as they seem to at least have some minimal amount of staff, and we know the NPCs are going to do a lot of the maintenance in the world, so they can probably do some of their own upkeep, but I do think that there's going to be areas that we interact with pretty frequently, at least with the people on board. Now, some examples of that could be using them to potentially help track down your bounty if they've seen that person in the area, or maybe getting information about the economy in that area, or you just get the random assignments that get handed out like investigating anomalies in the system. These could also potentially be locations where you might end up being able to drop exploration data, but we'll really have to see how that all fleshes out as they develop exploration. Now, mid-sized stations are probably going to be really plentiful, and they're going to have various purposes, but all of which you should be able to land on and enter on foot. Now, we have a few of them today, like Port Alizar. This is the one that you're most likely familiar with, and I look at this almost like an orbital outpost. This type of location is relatively well-functioning as far as the station is concerned, and it's really more of a stopover type of destination. These are going to be located around planets or moons, and can almost be thought of as like motels in a way. Finding a hotel on a planet may be complicated, it may be expensive, or maybe you don't need or want to go down to the planet, but you happen to be by one. You can land, you can stay the night, do a bit of light shopping, but there may be limitations as well. Repairing, refueling, rearming, those aren't going to be services that are typically offered at this type of destination, and the length of your stay may end up being limited depending on how the ship's storage system works in the game. If a sleep mechanic ends up in the game, though, and you have a ship that doesn't have a bunk like a Hornet, this may be your way to recharge your character, get a room, sleep for a little bit, and then get going. Now, I wouldn't expect to find a station like this in the middle of the deep, because you really need more ability out of a station that isn't in close proximity to civilization. Another type of mid-sized station, that we have today is Security Port Korea. It's a security station. And this is a purpose-built location designed with law enforcement in mind. With computer systems to track criminals, and likely in full release, we're going to see things like, contingents of advocates or hired mercenaries that are looking for work. And those of you that are interested in taking on a job like that are probably going to be able to stop in and see what's available, much like the TDD on planets for cargo and other jobs. And you should be able to pick up your bounties, cash them in, drop off wanted players, or maybe even enlist in a mission where you could play as a Marine. Now, there's going to be things that you can do here on your own, or you may be able to find jobs that lead you to this type of location. But much like the orbital outpost like Alizar, you're not going to have many ship-based services available to you, and you're probably also not going to have the ability to stay the night unless you're a criminal. And then there's going to be other mid-sized stations that are purpose-built for their tasks. We have the Kovalek shipping hub today, where you may be able to take on cargo missions or pick up and drop cargo or check job boards, or they may end up just being deserted like the one we have today. But they should have some unique characteristics that make them useful to the jobs that they support, even if we don't have that in the game right now. I could see some examples of that, other ones being like ore storage or refineries for the mining role, data and exploration hubs to buy and sell information, or really anything that ends up being kind of specific to a certain type of gameplay. Another purpose-built location is the Cryastro facility, and if I had to guess, that's probably a brand, and we'll end up seeing other types of these facilities popping up. But what you can expect at these types of stations are lots of landing pads, drones to repair, refuel, and rearm your ship, and potentially some limited ability to get information about the system that you're in. Either way, I don't think these are necessarily going to be out in deep space on their own, but they may be a little bit more remote than some of the other types of stations we're talking about. This is more of a location that you're going to end up purposely seeking out because you're in need of the services that they offer, and you're not staying long as they don't really have interior bunks. Now, at some point, you may be able to enter and buy supplies for doing repairs on your own, but I don't really have a reason to say that's likely to happen at this point either. Then we get into the new one that spun up a lot of the conversations, and that's the truck stops. And these are named aptly because they're basically going to be fairly full-service stations, and pretty large in size if the video we got in the last Around the Verse is to be the measuring stick, considering the massive-looking station that we saw was being labeled as a medium-sized option. These locations should offer a little bit of everything with bunks, showers, restaurants, stores, refueling services as well. I don't know how much they're going to be able to, service things like repairs. Maybe they offer the service, but that crosses into the purpose of the Cryastro locations a little bit. So I would guess it's done, but maybe it's either more expensive or perhaps it depends on the size of the facility that you find. Maybe a medium or a large facility is able to repair, but a small one's not. Something like that. Now, as far as missions are concerned, if you're able to refuel here, I could see Starfarer pilots being offered missions to go harvest fuel and bring them back to these locations. And it appears that there's at least going to be some ability to drop off cargo at these locations too. There was some strange phrasing when it came to these locations about cargo, and keep in mind, this is really early in the truck stop phase, but it almost sounds like you may not have someone at the station that's actually permanently living there who buys your goods, but they are willing to store your goods and almost act like a middleman to help find someone else who is willing to buy them or take a mission to transport them. So we'll need to kind of follow that development a little bit as it moves forward, but they could act as remote locations to drop some goods instead of having to go to a planetary warehouse or a TDD to do that type of business. There are, or at least there should be, some job boards available at these locations as well. So, if you're just stopping over, you're taking a nap, you could wake up and then find what that next mission is going to be. We can be reasonably sure that there's going to be 3 sizes, small, medium, and large, and I would bet that they all offer different levels of service and amenities. I would also bet that the size is determined based on that location. For example, the largest of these facilities would only earn enough business to sustain itself if it were situated in a trade lane or a more heavily populated area. Whereas a small truck stop may be present and common in the outer reaches of a system where the population is much less and they don't need as much population coming in to actually support their business, and there's not as much need for the service there. The last one is one that we haven't really heard about before, so this is more of a guess on my part, but I would have to assume that there's going to be some sort of military outpost that's prevalent as well, especially in more dangerous systems, like those that are closer to the Vanduul lines, or, the types of systems that are just military hubs. These are likely going to be spots where you cannot land. You might not even be able to get too close, otherwise you might get fired upon. And I would expect that they're housing mini fighters, they're going to have bombers, they're going to probably even have cap ships that are docked at these locations that are ready to be deployed. Maybe even to intercept you if you get too close. So I wouldn't be surprised if these stations themselves had weaponry on them. But like I've mentioned, it's going to depend on the development and what they want that to really be. And I guess there's really one more type to discuss, and this is a very generic one, and that's locations like Spider or Grimhex. These sort of hodgepodge locations that are either man-made or taking existing types of locations like a mining base and being converted for less legal operations like piracy hubs or black markets and that sort of thing. But most of these are likely going to be taking on the shape of something else that we've seen. Just the location and the activity in the sector may mean that the type of station isn't a real indicator of what's happening inside of that station. So there you have it. Those are the different types of space-based locations that I think we can expect to see in some of what we know today. There's probably going to be new and different types that are added, as well as some that kind of fall between them, almost like these hybrid locations. But I think those are the general types of locations that we're going to end up seeing, and hopefully that gives you some information about it. So I'm going to continue to cover this topic as we get more information. But if you have questions in the meantime or comments, please put them down below. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys watching. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.